Good morning, everybody. Please stay standing. Today is the anniversary of the adoption of the Stars and Stripes. It's Flag Day, so we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'll join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Be seated.
Let me approach real quick.
Yes, you can.
Just wanted to
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Collade.
Good morning.
In your testimony, you talked a lot about money and influence and KOLs, and then yesterday I asked you some questions about money and influence in you. We'll come back to all of that in a little bit, but I'm just wondering, as we start out here, did you have any time last night to look at your time records in order to give Judge Bachman a better estimate of the total amount of time that you'd spent working on this case?
No, I thought that the judge wanted me to estimate, and that's what I did in court yesterday.
I'm just asking a yes or no answer. Did you have time last night to look at your time records in order to come up with a more precise estimate than what you gave us yesterday?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. We went over this in court, testified fully about it pursuant to your direction. I don't believe the Oklahoma rules on experts allow anything what Mr. Yoder is doing. Dr. Claudia spoke very clearly about the precise amount of time he spent after his deposition and during the trial.
All I'm asking, Your Honor, is whether he reviewed his records to provide a better estimate. If he didn't, we'll move on.
He answered no, so we'll sustain the objection.
So we'll go with the estimates you gave yesterday when we get to that point, okay?
Yes.
So when we stopped yesterday, we were looking at the prop petition in 2012 and the FDA's response in 2013, and we had gone over quite a bit of information in that. What I want to now do is turn back to that exchange with respect to the issue of addiction. Okay? You with me?
Yes, I am.
So, as we talked about yesterday, a Schedule II narcotic like a prescription opioid is, by definition, highly addictive, correct?
I'd have to take a look at the Controlled Substances Act. I believe Schedule II says high abuse potential and likelihood for I'd really need to review the exact language in the Controlled Substances Act. But yes, a schedule, by being in Schedule II, that is where we would put a drug that has a high abuse potential and a high potential for addiction.
And you prescribe in your practice, or at least you have prescribed in your practice, Schedule II drugs, right?
Very infrequently. I prescribe buprenorphine, which is a Schedule III drug.
Okay, so let's clarify that. You're not a pain management doctor, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you don't, in the course of your day-to-day practice, treat and diagnose patients as a pain management doctor, correct?
So I haven't been doing clinical work for at least a year and a half, about a year and a half. When I was in clinical practice, I had many patients who suffered from chronic pain. That was how they became opioid addicted, and their pain problems were an area of clinical attention, but patients did not come to me for treatment of their underlying pain problem.
Let's do it this way. Are you a pain treatment specialist?
No.
Is it true that you haven't prescribed opioids for pain in the last 10 years?
I don't know.
Okay. Do you have your deposition up there or not? If you don't, I don't know whether we still have it.
I do, sir.
You still have it up there?
I
now?
do.
Okay, look at the March 27 deposition at page 93 to 94. At line 21, page 93 going over to page 94, line 2. And does that refresh your recollection that at least at your deposition, you'd said it was probably about 10 years ago that you last prescribed an opioid for pain?
Yes.
And even 10 years ago, is it true that you didn't regularly prescribe opioids for pain management, correct?
Yes.
So let's go back then, if we could, to prescribe a Schedule II drug, like a prescription opioid. I think we talked about this before. A doctor has to, a healthcare provider, HCP, is that a better term?
Sure.
An HCP has to be registered with the DEA, correct?
I think the better term would be clinician. And yes, to prescribe a scheduled drug, a clinician would need a DEA registration.
So in order to, as a patient, get a lawful prescription of an opioid, they would need to get a prescription from a healthcare provider registered with the DEA. True?
I believe that's true.
Okay. Now, there are some people who obtain prescription opioids without a prescription from a healthcare provider registered with the DEA, correct?
I'm sorry, that's a little confusing. Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. You've been looking at this area a long time, right?
Yes.
And you know there are people who buy prescription opioid pills off the street, correct?
Yes.
And they do that either to use them for recreational drug use, right? Some?
Not more so because they're addicted, not because it's fun. People who buy opioids on the street or buy opioids from a drug dealer or who visit a pill mill, usually they're addicted in maintaining their supply. People who are using opioids recreationally, they're typically using pills that were available from friends or family for free. They don't typically buy them from drug dealers. That's with opioids.
Okay, so that's another way someone might obtain a prescription opioid without having a prescription for use for that person from a healthcare provider registered with the DEA, right? They might take it out of the medicine cabinet of a family member or a friend, right?
Yes, recreational use is typically that type of use.
Okay, so those are just examples of how someone might be using a prescription opioid unlawfully, correct?
That's not lawful, correct.
Good. So the risk of that misuse and abuse and diversion of opioids is something that is warned about in product labels approved by the FDA, correct?
Yes.
All right, let's take a look if we could pull up Exhibit 2769. And this is the Duragesic label,
Yes.
and we looked at this before, I believe. And if you look at the last page, you'll see this is the Janssen 2003 label.
Yes.
So if you look at page 11,
Just one moment.
sure, get organized, and we'll just take this step by step.
Okay, what page?
Page 11. And you'll see there's a section there, misuse, abuse, and diversion of opioids. You see that?
Not yet, just get that.
Down at the bottom of that page.
I see the section.
And in this warning that's part of the approved product label, the warning is, fentanyl is an opioid agonist of the morphine type. Such drugs are sought by drug abusers and people with addiction disorders and are subject to criminal diversion. You see that?
I do see that.
So you had mentioned that some of the abuse or misuse are folks who are addicted and have an addiction disorder, right? It's one
Yes.
group of folks who might be trying to abuse these prescription opioids, right?
I would use different language.
I got it, because you treat those people, right?
Right, and they're not really abusing the drugs. They're addicted and they're maintaining their supply.
I understand, but they are using it unlawfully, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll use that term. And then we also talked about folks who you would consider to be a drug abuser, someone who steals the medicine out of the medicine cabinet.
I don't like the term drug abuser.
The word the FDA approves, right?
No, not anymore. This is 2003. They would not use that language today.
2003, they did, correct?
Yes,
And as we said, words matter, right?
they do.
Then it goes on to say, fentanyl can be abused in a manner similar, well, and strike that. So just to be clear, you're aware, are you not, you've learned in the course of all the work you've done in this case, that Janssen cut back on active marketing of Duragesic in 2005, correct?
I think that's correct.
You're aware that in 2008, Janssen stopped all active marketing of Duragesic, correct?
Correct, but to say that's correct is somewhat misleading because they were, I believe, receiving 90% of the sales of Duragesic sold under a different name by a different company.
Right, but
And I
it's-
think that company might have been promoting.
We're talking about Janssen's marketing of its products right now.
Yes,
And is it correct?
Yes.
Have you learned in all the work you've done in this case that Janssen stopped active marketing of its Duragesic brand fentanyl patch in 2008?
I believe that's true.
Okay, so let's keep going. This label we're looking at was the label that was in effect 2003, 2004, 2005, correct?
I know it was in effect in 2003 because it's dated 2003, but there were multiple labels, so I'm not sure how long this label was in effect.
Okay, do you know for a fact that there was a change to this label before 2005?
I don't know for a fact that it was before 2005.
Do you know for a fact that this label was not in effect as of 2008?
I'm not sure.
So let's look at this label for now, okay? And if you take a look then at the language we were looking at, page 11,
Yes.
fentanyl can be abused in a manner similar to other opioids, legal or illicit. This should be considered when prescribing or dispensing Duragesic in situations where the physician or pharmacist is concerned about an increased risk of misuse, abuse, or diversion. Now, we'll come back in a bit to this individual prescribing decision. But again, at least 2003, the FDA approved label, the language dealing with this particular issue, they're using the term abused, right?
It says abuse.
Okay. So let's go to the last portion here. Duragesic has been reported as being abused by other methods and routes of administration. These practices will result in uncontrolled delivery of the opioid and pose a significant risk to the abuser that could result in overdose and death. And then it refers the reader to the warnings in drug abuse and addiction section, right?
Yes, it does.
So let's look at the warning section. Look at page 8 if you would. And section 5.1. Oh, I see. Okay. So let's look at the Nucenta label. Look at exhibit, I don't know if you have this one, but I think it's exhibit 2785. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
So we were looking at Duragesic, I apologize, I got a little... section on Duragesic, but let's look at the Nucenta label. And you have 2785 in front of you.
I do.
And you'll see on the first page of this, is this in evidence? Yes. Okay, may we publish it?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. If you look at the first page, just in the top left-hand corner, this is the Nucenta ER product label, and it looks like there's an approval date there, 2008. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And do you know, Dr. Kolodny, whether this is the initial approval of the product label for Nucenta ER by the FDA?
I'm sorry, are you asking me if this was the original label from when the drug was approved?
Correct.
I'm not sure. I don't think it is.
Yeah, look at
But I'm
page
not sure.
37. That might help us.
Yes.
And this actually shows that this document was revised in August of 2012, right?
Yes, so I guess it's not the original label.
So that would be the date, the effective date of this particular product label, right? August of 2012?
It's saying, yes, that the label was changed in 2012, and it was changed again after this, too.
Okay. Did you learn in the course of all the work you've done in this case that Janssen first started to actively market and sell Nucenta ER in 2012?
I was under the impression that the marketing began before it was released.
We'll talk, let me make my question clear, because I know where you're going.
Your Honor, I object to that. The witness was right in the middle of answering a question. Mr. Yoder didn't like what he was going to say, and so he said, stop, we'll get to it later. I think the witness should be permitted to finish his question. It was an inaccurately posed question. Dr. Kolodny was clarifying the truth.
Well, it wasn't clear. It was an answer from Dr. Kolodny, not a question. But the point is, he was going off on something I wasn't asking about, and I'm just trying to direct you.
I'll let Mr. Yoder ask this question. Overruled.
Sure. So, we're not talking about unbranded marketing materials.
Okay.
We spent some time the last few days talking about some unbranded marketing materials that preceded the launch of Nucenta ER. And we'll get to those. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the active promotion of the brand Nucenta ER,
Okay.
and the sale of that particular brand by Janssen. And did you learn in the course of all the work you've done in this case that active promotion of the Nucynta ER brand and the sale of that brand first occurred in the 2011-2012 timeframe?
No, I thought it was before 2012 that the marketing and sales of the brand began. I thought it was shortly after 2009 that they began specifically promoting the brand and selling the brand.
Okay, so your memory from what you've seen is 2009.
That shortly, yeah, maybe,
Maybe
yes.
2010?
Yeah, I'm not certain. I thought it was after the drug was approved that they started marketing it, and that was in 2009.
Okay. Was it, you're aware there's two, we'll get to it, but you're aware there's two formulations of Nucynta. There's Nucynta, which is the immediate release, and then Nucynta ER, which is the extended release, correct?
Yes.
And was it Nucynta, the immediate release, that was actively marketed and sold starting in the 2009 timeframe?
I believe so. Yes.
And Nucynta ER was first actively promoted as a brand and sold sometime thereafter, correct?
You know, I'm not exactly certain about the specific dates that the marketing and sales officially began.
Is it your understanding, based on everything you've looked at in the course of your work in this case, that Janssen first launched Nucynta IR and then at some later point in time
Yes.
launched Nucynta ER?
Yes, I do know that Nucynta immediate release was released before extended release Nucynta.
And did you learn in the course of your work in this matter about how long a time lag there was between Janssen's active promotion and sale of Nucynta IR and its active promotion and sale of Nucynta ER?
Probably, but I'm not certain of the time frame at the moment.
Did you learn that it was about a 2-year time lag? That sound about right.
I can't remember the time frame of when the active marketing of the brand began.
If I told you it was a 2-year time lag, would you have any reason to take issue with that?
No, I would not.
Okay, so let's look back at Exhibit 2785, if we would, and we're looking at the Nucynta ER label. And in the upper left-hand corner, there's the black box. You see that?
I do?
Which provides some very specific warnings, including warnings about abuse, right?
Yes.
And then if you take a look at page 8, there's a specific section there entitled Warnings and Precautions, right?
Getting there.
Dr. Clown, could you speak up more closely in that microphone? Thank you.
Certainly. I'm at the page.
Okay. And so on page 8, there's a section 5, Warnings and Precautions, that has a subsection 5.1 entitled Abuse Potential, right?
Yes, there is a section that's 5.1 that says abuse potential.
And among other things, it starts out with a warning that Nucynta ER contains pentadol, and that's the active opioid ingredient in this particular prescribed opioid, right?
That's true.
Which was an innovation of Janssen, right? You aware of that?
Yes, I believe that's true.
We'll talk about that in a second. An opioid agonist and a Schedule II controlled substance. And then it goes on to describe various ways in which the pentadol can be abused, correct?
Yes.
Similar to what was described in the Duragesic warning that we were just looking at, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go to the FDA's response to the prop petition. If you take a look at Exhibit 1576. And if I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Somebody, I think, did a good job last night and actually cleaned up and organized all the exhibits.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I handed you Exhibit J 1576, and we've looked at some of this, but I want you to go back to page 2. In the background section, that first paragraph under opioids. We looked at that paragraph. It talks about opioids, when prescribed and used properly, can effectively manage pain and alleviate suffering. But then in the second paragraph, it talks about the risks of opioids, correct?
That's correct.
And it talks about how those risks could include addiction. It's one of the risks, correct?
Yes.
Overdose, correct?
Yes.
Even death, right?
Yes.
And you would agree that those warnings in the product labels we were just looking at also address those risks, right?
Yes.
So, if you look then back at, strike that, and one of the risks which you're familiar with, you're an addiction doctor, is addiction, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's look at Exhibit 2765. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Unfortunately, I think all that organization is going to become disorganization, and there will be too much time to these. But we'll try to keep it straight. So I've given you Exhibit J 2765. Do you have that?
I do.
And let's take a look at page 12 just to establish the date of this. You have it?
I do.
And what's the date then that's showing on page 12?
1994.
So if we could publish, Your Honor?
Yes, permission granted.
So just look at the first page. This is a Duragesic full prescribing information. And right at the beginning of the first page in the box starts out, because serious or life-threatening hypoventilation could occur, Duragesic is contraindicated, and then it includes some contraindications, correct?
That's correct.
It also says right up front here, Duragesic should not be administered to children under 12 years of age or patients under 18 years of age who weigh less than 50 kilograms, 110 pounds, except in an authorized investigational research setting. See that?
Yes.
That's a specific warning in this black box, right?
Yes.
So if you look at page 9, and if you go down to drug abuse and dependence,
Yes.
it provides, and again, this is the FDA-approved product label, right?
Yes.
Fentanyl is a Schedule II controlled substance. You can all agree with that, right?
Yes.
And can produce drug dependence similar to that produced by morphine. Duragesic, therefore, has the potential for abuse. And there, you would probably say more for addiction, right? You don't like the word abuse?
No, I think the word abuse is okay. I don't like the word abuser, and I think the word abuse has to be used appropriately. Misuse may be a little better than abuse in most circumstances.
Well, misuse, abuse, let's keep going on. Tolerance, physical and psychological dependence may develop upon repeated administration of opioids. Again, specific warning in this product label, correct?
Yes?
And then it says iatrogenic, did I pronounce that right?
Iatrogenic.
Iatrogenic, there's always like an emphasis on a different syllable with these words you physicians use. Iatrogenic? And what does that mean?
That, an iatrogenic medical problem is a medical problem caused by medical treatment.
Okay, so iatrogenic would mean something that's caused by medical treatment,
Yes.
like taking a prescribed opioid according to the instructions given to you by your physician.
Yes.
Iatrogenic addiction following opioid administration is relatively rare. That's an approved statement by the FDA, correct?
Yes, in 1994, FDA allowed Johnson & Johnson to put that in their label.
Based upon its review of all the information that was provided by Janssen in order to get FDA approval to market and sell this drug, correct?
Your Honor, we object to going into the FDA approval process. This was never discussed by Dr. Claudia. I think it's fair game for him to testify about what's in the label, but not about the approval process. It's on the scope. It's part of their motion they filed, which we haven't had time to respond to, and it's a bait and switch attempt by Johnson & Johnson on the one-year anniversary of their fraudulent removal of federal court.
I have no idea what counsel's trying to do with those kinds of statements, with bait and switch and fraudulent removal. This witness has testified, Your Honor, that my client or others made statements about the abuse potential of prescription opioids. And he has accused statements suggesting that there was a low addiction or abuse potential to be false and misleading. He has provided that testimony. This is a statement that was approved by the FDA that said proper use of prescription opioids, iatrogenic addiction is relatively rare. It directly addresses testimony this witness has given. And whether he knows the process or not, and I suspect he does, the fact that they didn't ask him about this does not preclude me from doing cross-examination. Of course they didn't ask him about this because it doesn't support his testimony.
May I respond briefly, Your Honor? The question about whether the label said this in 1994 when they were marketing for cancer pain and used the word relatively, I think that's fair for him to say, yes, it says that, and here's what I think about it. For them to ask about the approval process was not brought up. We all know, I know what it's about. Now, I will say on behalf of the state, if the defendant will stipulate, they will not try to claim preemption, they will not remove this case, then if we're all safe from that, I'm sure Dr. Claudia might have an awful lot to say about the approval process. But we've been through this before, and I think it's completely improper. So I would ask that the questions be limited to, what does the label say? What is your opinion about it? That's the objection.
Gentlemen, we've talked about this earlier. I sustain the state's objection. This defendant's, this witness is not required to answer questions about the regulatory process, consistent with Mr. Beckworth's concerns.
To be clear, though, Your Honor, I'm not asking him about the process. I'm asking about the end result of that process that was part of the label that was provided to anyone who was prescribing this drug and what they would be given on this particular issue. So I'm not asking him about the process and how we got there. I'm asking him about the end of the process and what information was available to physicians that he has claimed were deceived by statements that were made by my clients. So I'm not intending to ask him how the process works. That was not my intent. Can I try to rephrase it?
Yes, you may.
Let me ask it this way, without getting into the process that got us here. Do you agree or disagree with the statement that iatrogenic addiction following opioid administration is relatively rare?
So, in the treatment of pain at the end of life, for people suffering, for example, with metastatic cancer, many clinicians did not see patients receiving palliative care with opioids develop addiction. It would have been difficult for them to see that in a palliative care setting. And so I can understand why that language appears in this label, but we know for a fact that with use, long-term use of opioids, iatrogenic addiction is not rare.
Doctor, this approved product label was not limited to cancer patients, correct?
What it says is Duragesic is indicated for treatment of chronic pain such as that of malignancy. That's what it says right in that first box.
Okay, well, let's look at page 6, okay? Such as, words are important, aren't they?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at the indications and usage on page 6. And can you read the first paragraph?
Duragesic is indicated in the management of chronic pain in patients who require continuous opioid analgesia for pain that cannot be managed by lesser means, such as acetaminophen opioid combinations, non-steroidal analgesics, or PRN dosing with short-acting opioids.
Does that paragraph, words are important, use the word cancer?
The word cancer does not appear in that paragraph.
Now, I know this was during the 90s when Duragesic fentanyl patches were being sold. And do you know when this particular label was amended for Duragesic, 2765?
I think within a year or two, it was revised multiple times, the Duragesic label.
Can you tell me when this label was first revised, based on all the work that you've done in this
I
case?
can't remember the exact date. I know that within a couple of years that it was revised, and there were multiple revisions to this label.
So, subsequent to this period of time, and before the FDA responded to the prompt petition, the FDA also had issued guides with respect to the use of opioids in the treatment of pain, correct?
I'm sorry, could you ask that again?
Sure. Well, let's do this. Is 3606 May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
You haven't offered any in yet, are you? Okay, just one.
So I've handed you Exhibit J3606, Dr. Kolodny, and these are Guide to Safe Use of Medicine that was issued by the FDA in 2009. Are you familiar with this guide?
I'm not, it looks familiar.
Okay. Your Honor, I move Exhibit J3606 into evidence.
No objection.
J3606 will be admitted into the evidence and made published.
So you're aware that the FDA has from time to time issued guides with respect to the usage of various pain medicine and drugs that are under its regulatory supervision, correct?
I don't think they regularly issue guides on, clearly they sometimes issue guides. This says a guide, but I'm not aware of FDA routinely doing this.
Okay, well, let's take a look at this one. And if you look at the first page, in the third paragraph,
Real quick, just for the record, I didn't object to the document, but I do object to one thing. On the top left corner of these pages, it has a 5/18/2019 date. I just like for the record to show that's, I think, a print date from the defendant. I think this document itself is from 2009 or thereabouts. I need to put that on there.
Yeah.
I don't have an objection to the document itself.
and I think we can all agree that this is from 2009, and I think counsel's correct that one of these situations where when you print out the document, it prints out the current date. So I think the May 18, 2019 date just indicates the date that this particular document was printed.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so on the first page, starts out pain relief medicines, also known as analgesics and painkillers, are regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA. Some analgesics, including opioid analgesics, act on the body's peripheral and central nervous systems to block or decrease sensitivity to pain. Others act by inhibiting the formation of certain chemicals in the body. And then if you turn over to the second page, it actually provides a description, a more specific description of some of the medications that are used for pain relief. Do you see that? On the second page?
Yes,
Under the heading Prescription Medications.
yes.
And it starts out by describing opioids derived from opium. Opioid drugs are very powerful products. They act by attaching to a specific receptor in the brain, spinal cord, and gastrointestinal tract. Opioids can change the way a person experiences pain. And you agree with that? Is that a fair description?
Yes.
And then it goes on to mention some specific opioid medications: morphine, oxycodone, codeine, hydrocodone, correct?
Correct.
And then it indicates FDA has recently notified makers of certain opioid drugs that these products will need to have a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy to ensure that the benefits continue to outweigh the risk. And you've testified a bit to these REMS surveillance programs, correct? Or education programs. What would you call a REMS?
It's right there, a risk evaluation mitigation strategy. It's a requirement from FDA to manufacturers, pharmaceutical manufacturers of dangerous products, that they take special measures to keep the public safe.
So special measures, which would include education?
It depends on the REMS, and in the case of extended release long-acting opioids, the REMS included voluntary educational programs for prescribers.
And then also a monitoring program, right?
A monitoring program of who?
Monitoring the use of the drug.
Monitoring prescribers.
Does it include a monitoring element?
FDA monitors pharmaceutical companies to make sure they comply with the REMS, and they collect data from pharmaceutical companies about the REMS program, but there's no monitoring of prescribers in this particular REMS, nor does it require any particular monitoring of patients.
Well, we can come back to that. Then in the next paragraph, it goes on, affected opioid drugs, which include brand name and generic products, are formulated with the active ingredients fentanyl, hydromorphone, methadone, morphine, oxycodone, and oxymorphone, correct?
That's correct.
So it specifically references fentanyl, which is the active pharmaceutical ingredient in the Duragesic patch, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so let's turn to page 4. And there in this 2009 FDA guide, it's discussing misuse and abuse, right?
That's correct.
And the first paragraph provides misuse and abuse of pain medications can be extremely dangerous. This is especially so in regard to opioids. These medications should be stored in a place where they cannot be stolen. Did I read that correctly?
I believe you did.
And then in this FDA guide, they go on to state, according to National Institutes of Health, studies have shown that properly managed medical use of opioid analgesic compounds, parenthetically, taken exactly as prescribed, that's iatrogenic, right?
Iatrogenic.
Iatrogenic, I'll keep working on that, is safe, can manage pain effectively, and rarely causes addiction. Correct? Correct.
You're correct that that's what the document says.
Well, now let's look. Let's look at what the CDC has said. We talked about that a little bit. And is it true that the CDC has issued guidelines regarding the use of opioids for the treatment of pain?
Chronic pain in primary care settings, yes.
So let's take a look at those. It's Exhibit J382, I believe.
Your Honor, at this time, I would object under the rule of optional completeness under 2107. If you watch what happened, there's a lot of context around the statement on the document, and as soon as they got to the but part, the screen went blank. And that whole paragraph there is very important for balance and context about what's actually in that, the propensity of abuse and what happens with their drugs.
Your Honor, I
think under 2107, we're allowed to show that whole thing and have the witness talk about in context what that statement actually means. That's right out of the rule book.
Your Honor, we didn't object or make any attempt to try to tell Mr. Beckworth what portions of the document to ask witnesses to look at and read, and he did it repetitively throughout his examinations of every witness who's been on the stand, including Dr. Guideline. I'm entitled in cross-examination to refer the witness to a portion of the document without having him then read whatever else he wants to read in the document. If counsel wishes to bring something to the attention of the witness, he's entitled to do that during his redirect examination, but it is not appropriate in cross-examination for opposing counsel to be injecting himself into a cross-examination and asking to allow the witness to read whatever he wants to read from a document and make whatever comment he wants to make about a document. It's not appropriate.
I disagree. One, their failure to object if they thought I did something proper is a waiver on their part. It's not anything to do with me. Second, Rule 2107 says a remainder of the record. When a record or part thereof is introduced by a party, an adverse party may require the introduction. This is the key. I understand I can redirect. This is what the rule says. Quote, at that time of any other part or any other record that should be, in fairness, be considered contemporaneously with it. And so that rule of optional completeness deals with the timing at hand. All I would ask is we show that document, right, exactly like they had it, nothing more in the page, not the rest of the document, just that one section. It was on the board. Dr. Claudine addressed what's there.
Mr. Beck, may I, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Beckworth's doing this long enough to know better. That rule says that we can't just introduce part of a document. The whole document comes in. This whole document has come into evidence. It's in evidence. It's been introduced. He can ask questions about it when it's his time to ask questions. We're entitled to publish it in a way where we can ask our questions about what we believe is relevant without being forced to go through portions of the document that we don't think are relevant to our cross-examination of this witness.
All right, I'm going to overrule the objection. Let's move on.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I approach?
Yes.
So I've handed you Exhibit J382, which is the CDC guideline for prescribing opioids for chronic pain. You're right, United States 2016. And it shows a date, March 18, 2016. And you're familiar with these guidelines, correct?
I am.
Your Honor, I'd move Exhibit J382 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
J382 will be admitted into the evidence, and you may publish.
Thank you. So these were guidelines that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued in 2016 to provide guidance to treating physicians in how to prescribe opioids for treatment of chronic pain, correct?
That's correct.
So take a look, if you would, at page 3. And in the summary, the last sentence, I don't know if we can blow that up so it's a little bit easier to read. CDC has provided a checklist for prescribing opioids for chronic pain, and then it gives the website, as well as a website with additional tools to guide clinicians in implementing the recommendations. So you would agree that in this guide in 2016, the CDC is providing a checklist and tools to help physicians make the individual treatment decision of whether to prescribe an opioid for a patient with chronic pain, and if so, how to go about that prescription. Is that a fair statement? You'd put it a different way, I can tell from that one.
Yeah, I don't know that I would characterize it the way that you did.
Okay. In any event, this is a tool for healthcare providers, correct?
It's, I think, a tool for helping healthcare providers understand the CDC's recommendations and implement them.
And those recommendations are recommendations concerning the use of prescription opioids for the treatment of long-term chronic pain, correct?
There are recommendations related to opioid use for chronic pain.
Okay. So let me have you take a look at Exhibit 1223. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
This is one of the state's exhibits.
Thank you.
And it is in evidence. So may I publish, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
And you'll see this is a publication of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It's a weekly morbidity and mortality report, MMWR. You're familiar with these, right?
I am.
And you'll see this one is dated November 4, 2011, correct?
Correct.
And if you take a look at page 4, that's 2011, correct?
Correct.
In the last paragraph, public health interventions to reduce prescription drug overdose must strike a balance between reducing misuse and abuse and safeguarding legitimate access to treatment. To find this balance, healthcare providers should only use OPR in carefully screened and monitored patients when non-OPR treatments have not been sufficient to treat pain as recommended in evidence-based guidelines. You would agree with that, correct? You thinking?
I'm thinking about it. Just give me a moment. I'm not. I certainly wouldn't use language like this. Some of this I agree with, but I wouldn't. Some of it I'm not. I'm not crazy about the language. I can certainly understand why this language was used. This was the conventional wisdom at the time. I don't think today the CDC would use similar language.
When you say you're not crazy about it, does that mean you don't agree with it?
It misframes the issue. That's the problem with it.
So you disagree with the way the CDC has framed this issue. Fair statement?
No. I disagree with the language the CDC used in this statement. I think it was a critically important report, and I remember when it was released. I don't think the CDC would use language like this today.
Well, I don't need you to speculate as to what the CDC may or may not do today. We're looking at what they actually did in 2011, okay? And what they actually did is use language in 2011. Whether you disagreed with it or not, you weren't crazy about it, were you?
I very much liked what the CDC was doing and what's in this report. There's a sentence that if they had asked me, I would have suggested that they use somewhat different language. But I think this was a critically important report that I very much agree with.
And as part of this critically important report, the CDC included these words that we're just looking at now, right?
Yes, so
And
They
words matter, don't they?
they do, which is what I'm not crazy about. What I discussed yesterday was my concern about the framework that the CDC used and that everybody was using at the time.
Let me ask you to keep going on what the CDC actually said in 2011. So let's keep going. In the same paragraph, states, as regulators of healthcare practice, have the responsibility and authority to monitor and correct inappropriate and illegal prescribing. Data from state prescription drug monitoring programs, which collect records of prescription drugs prone to abuse in pharmacies, and Medicaid claims data can be used to identify and address OPR misuse and abuse. State Medicaid programs and other public insurers can use economic measures to hold providers accountable for their prescribing of OPR. And OPR is what?
Opioid pain reliever.
And other controlled prescription drugs. State professional licensing boards can take action against prescribers misusing their licenses, and law enforcement agencies can take action against illegal activities. State policies that focus on providers operating outside of normal medical practice such as laws prohibiting so-called pill mills, are a promising approach. So all of that we just went over are actions that the CDC is indicating that state agencies can take to try to prevent misuse and abuse of prescription opioids, correct?
Yes.
And one of the ways that the CDC was recognizing that states can take action to prevent misuse and abuse of prescription opioids are these prescription drug monitoring programs, right?
That's correct. PDMPs.
Pardon, PDMPs?
Yes.
Probably said that a little fast. PDMPs. And PDMPs, you're familiar with those, right?
I am.
And indeed, I think you've written publicly, have you not, that you consider PDMPs to be the best tool available to stop the misuse and abuse of prescription opioids?
I don't think I would have written that they're the best tool available. I don't think I would have written that, what you just said in that exact language. What I believe is that they are a very important tool in addressing the opioid crisis for many different reasons. We can base interventions on PDMPs to help link people to treatment. PDMPs can be used by prescribers to identify patients who might be addicted. They're very important.
Let's break it down, though, because I'm not sure there's been clear testimony of what it is. So can you just explain what is a prescription drug monitoring program?
Sure. So basically, they're databases that states operate. I believe almost every state in the country has one. I'm not sure that Missouri has one yet. Excuse me. And they contain data on controlled substances. It's a little different from state to state. Some states may have all scheduled drugs in them. Some may have just a few. And they're usually available to a prescriber, not always, to go into that database, to check that database before writing a prescription, to ensure that the patient isn't visiting multiple prescribers. They are sometimes available to law enforcement, although some states have, I guess, statutes that prohibit law enforcement or state medical boards from using that data unless it's part of an active investigation of a prescriber, which is unfortunate because they are valuable tools.
And these prescription drug monitoring programs can be mandatory or voluntary, correct?
Yes. In some states, doctors are required to consult the PDMP before they write that prescription, and in some states, it's voluntary.
And would you agree that if the program isn't made mandatory, in your view, doctors are not going to participate?
There's data that suggests that when it's up to a doctor to decide whether or not to consult the PDMP, that many doctors don't bother. Many doctors think that they can tell by looking at a patient who may or may not have a problem, and of course they can't. And so in states where use of the PDMP has been made mandatory, you see a lot more use of the PDMP.
And would you agree that it's important then for a state to make the program mandatory?
Excuse me. Yes, I would like to see every state in the country make use of the PDMP mandatory. I don't think it, we know that if it's voluntary, very few doctors use it routinely.
Is it true, doctor, that in 2014 you publicly stated that prescription drug monitoring programs are probably our best tool for bringing this crisis under control?
Yes, I think I said that.
And you said that, among other places, in an interview that you gave to National Public Radio reporter Melissa Block, correct?
Yes,
That a true statement?
that's a true statement, but the way you had originally asked me the question, do I think it's the best, I think you had said, is it the best tool to address the abuse problem? I'm not sure exactly what language you used, but I do think it's one of our best tools, or maybe even the single best tool available to a state.
And it's important that it be mandatory, right?
I believe that states should make use of the PDMP mandatory.
And words matter, right?
Words matter.
Okay, let's go back to the CDC guidelines that we were looking at. And I have now disorganized things. So we were looking at 12, Exhibit State 1223. And I'd like to show you a document that's been marked as Exhibit J 3565. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Exhibit J 3565 is an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, 2019 article dated, or at least it's downloaded here, April 24, 2019, entitled "No Shortcuts to Safer Opioid Prescribing." And the authors are Deborah Dowell, Tamara Hagerich, and Roger Chu. And you're familiar with this article, are you not, Doctor?
I am.
And you're familiar with Dr. Chu, right?
Yes.
Who's Dr. Chu?
Dr. Chow was...
Chow, am I mispronouncing it?
I think so, or I'm mispronouncing it.
One of us.
I think it's Chow, though. He's an expert in evidence-based medicine. I believe he was one of the co-signers of the request to FDA to change labels. The CDC worked with him to evaluate the evidence for long-term use of opioids before issuing a guideline, calling attention to the fact that we don't have evidence supporting long-term use. He also did help APS and AAPM with reviewing the evidence for a guideline that they issued in 2009.
So do you generally agree with Dr. Chow's views or not?
Yes, generally, I believe we have similar views about opioid prescribing.
Your Honor, I'd move Exhibit J 3565 into evidence.
No objection.
J 3565 will be admitted into the evidence.
And may we publish?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So if you take a look at this article in the second column on the first page, the authors state, in addition, the CDC, including the authors of this perspective, who were also authors of the guideline. And is that what you were saying, that Dr. Chow was involved actually in connection with the CDC's issuance of the guidelines for the use of prescription opioids for treatment of chronic pain?
That's right. He was the one non-CDC person involved in drafting the guideline.
And then it goes on in the next paragraph, efforts to implement prescribing recommendations to reduce opioid-related harms are laudable. Unfortunately, some policies and practices purportedly derived from the guideline have in fact been inconsistent with and often go beyond its recommendations. A consensus panel has highlighted these inconsistencies, which include inflexible application of recommended dosage and duration thresholds, and policies that encourage hard limits and abrupt tapering of drug dosages. You see that?
I do.
So he's expressing some concern here that some have interpreted the guidelines in a way that had produced, in his view, some unfortunate consequences, correct?
Yes.
Including what he described as inflexible application of recommended dosage and duration thresholds, right?
Right, but I think did he say, what they're saying is that the CDC is receiving reports basically of patients being abruptly tapered off of opioids who had been on them for a while, and that where that might have happened, that they're hearing that it happened because of a misinterpretation of the guideline. In other words, the CDC was calling attention to the fact that opioids are lousy drugs for chronic pain, and in some places there were patients already on opioids who were being abruptly taken off, and CDC wanted to make clear we're not calling for patients to be rapidly forced off of opioids.
Fair to say the point being made here again is it needs to be an individual physician's determination based upon the specific analysis of risk and benefits for the patient?
I believe that a physician who is well informed about the risks and benefits of a medication and who has a good understanding of the patient in front of them should be making the clinical decisions.
Let's take a look at another document, if we would. Exhibit 3799. Can I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Okay, exhibit J 3799 is pain management best practices issued by the Pain Management Best Practices Interagency Task Force. It's a report entitled Updates, Gaps, Inconsistencies, and Recommendations. This is indicated to be the draft final report. You're familiar with this document, correct, Doctor?
Yes.
And what is the Interagency Task Force?
So the history of this task force is that in, I think, 2016, when Congress was drafting the first comprehensive legislation to address the opioid crisis, a provision was included in that legislation calling on HHS to create a task force that would issue best practices in treating pain. And the background for this was that at the time that that legislation was being worked on, excuse me, at the time the legislation was being worked on, the CDC's guideline had just been released or was about to be released, and opioid manufacturers didn't like the CDC's guideline, and so they lobbied Congress for the inclusion of a provision in the CARA Act that would require HHS to have a task force that would issue best practices. And one of the concerns that opioid manufacturers had, which is, I am answering your question.
Sorry. Your Honor, I would move to strike. It's non-responsive. He's starting to go well beyond. I just asked, what is the task force? That's all. He's telling a complete story and working it in with the theory that he's trying to espouse here. That's not responsive to my question.
It was an open-ended question. What is the task force? This is the preeminent expert in this field. Look, it's not only rude, it's just improper. I asked that the witness be allowed to answer his questions.
Your Honor, I would say, I think it's improper when Dr. Plotney's been answering my questions for most of the morning, and I appreciate that.
I will sustain the objection.
May he finish his answer?
You may finish the answer.
So the origin of this task force, as I was explaining, the CDC in the development of its guideline excluded the pain organizations that we reviewed the other day and the key opinion leaders when the provision was included in CARA creating this task force and lobbied for by opioid manufacturers. It included language specifying representation on this task force by those same groups that the CDC didn't want involved in the writing of its guideline. And so this a draft report has actually been criticized by the Trump administration, even though it came out of HHS. In fact, Kellyanne Conway's office had serious concerns about this document.
So if you don't like this document, is that fair
I
statement?
think there's language in it I like. For example, on page 15, they're referring to some of what we talked about. Pain is the fifth vital sign and a pain management movement that encouraged opioid prescribing. But there's other language in this document that I think is a problem.
Okay, well, let's look at the date of this draft. If you look at page 3, you'll see the date of the draft report is May 6, 2019, correct?
I'm sorry, where are you?
Bottom of page 3,
Yes.
lower left-hand corner.
Yes.
Okay. So the date of this draft final report was May 6, 2019, correct?
Yes.
You aware that a final report has been issued?
Yes.
And that final report was issued just at the end of May, correct?
I believe so.
And have you reviewed the final report?
I haven't.
Your Honor, we have the final report. I will acknowledge that it is not on the exhibit list because it was just issued on May 30 of this year, but it is a report that puts into final the draft that we have before us. And so I would ask for leave of court to mark the final report so we have that as a new exhibit.
Your Honor, as long as doctors, let's rephrase that so I don't look like how it's working. We would not object to this being utilized as long as Dr. Clive is asked whether he's had an opportunity to review it. And if the answer to that is no, if he's given an opportunity to review it, then I think it's fine. I don't know the answer to that question. I do know, I don't think that was your review.
Pardon?
Did you give me a copy?
No?
I'm just trying to see if this is the industry funded response with what we're doing. What day was this?
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thanks.
Sir, could you maybe ask that predicate and then I would withhold an objection?
I think I should be allowed to ask the questions I want to ask, just like Mr. Beckworth was allowed to ask the questions he wants to ask. So if I could try to lay a foundation for this, Your Honor, I will do so.
I agree. I just want to know if I could wait on my objection and see if there was a...
Sure, you may renew your objection or state an objection later on.
Thank you.
Well,
Go ahead, Mr. Yoder.
I would move into evidence the draft report, Your Honor, Exhibit J, 3799.
Which, is that the one you just gave me?
No, that's the one that's marked 3799.
That he's already testified to, Your Honor, so I would move that into evidence.
We do not object to the draft.
J 3799 will be admitted into the evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. So may we publish that?
3799, yes.
And if we could go to page 70. So take a look at, actually, page 74, if you would. It's a little confusing. It's 74 of the report, and of the exhibit, it's 3799.0076. And the second paragraph,
I'm sorry, page 74, did you say?
yes, it's page 74 of the report, and it's page 76 of the exhibit. The pages don't align.
You're looking at the wrong one. Look at,
Look at the draft report. It's exhibit
yes, that one, you're right.
3799.
Oh, thank you.
Okay? Apologize that the page numbers don't align, but it is, just to make sure we're all on the same page here. The page in the upper right-hand corner says review of the CDC guideline. You have that? Upper right-hand corner, number 4, review of the CDC guideline.
I'm sorry, I think I'm still on the wrong page. So you, 76 of
Look at the, let me just suggest you look at the screen. See
Oh,
the
there,
upper-
yes, I am on the right page.
Okay. So if you look at the second paragraph, it's talking about this problematic unintended consequence that you had raised before, where some physicians were responding to the CD guidelines by changing the way tapering or medication discontinuation or abandonment was being handled. Fair statement?
Reportedly.
Yeah. And the question there is that tapering someone down or discontinuing their opioid prescription in a way that may have resulted in difficulties for the patient because it was either done too soon or too absolute.
Yeah,
And I understand my words may not describe it perfectly, but that's the concept, right?
the concept is that if a patient's been on opioids long-term, it's not appropriate to abruptly discontinue them. It's actually cruel because they'll go into severe withdrawal, which can be an agonizing experience.
Okay. So look at the top paragraph, because that's what I really wanted to ask you about then. And there, it starts out, and starts with the second sentence. Although the CDC guideline was not intended to be model legislation, at least 28 states have gone beyond the guidelines and enacted legislation related to opioid prescription limits. As a result, such unintended consequences have led healthcare providers to limit or not provide pain treatment due in part to concerns and undue burdens of investigation and prosecution by drug enforcement. Furthermore, many states and organizations have implemented the guideline without recognizing that the intended audience was PCPs, have used legislation to override what should be medical decision-making by healthcare professionals, and have applied them to all physicians, dentists, NPs, and PAs, including pain specialists. Some stakeholders have interpreted the guideline as intended to broadly reduce the amount of opioids prescribed for treating pain. Some experts have noted that the guideline emphasizes the risks of opioids while minimizing the benefit of this medication class when properly managed. So that was a different unintended consequences that the interagency task force was commenting on, correct?
It's language in a report that came from a group called the Interagency Pain Management Task Force, but not all of the task force members agreed with the report, including the representative from the White House Office of National Drug Control. So the White House actually did not agree with the language in this report. In particular, the White House believed that this was an attack on the CDC guideline.
Take a look at page 7, if you would. Do you know who Daniel Claw is, C-L-A-U-W?
Yes, I do.
He's another expert in this case?
Yes,
For the state, right?
correct.
The draft report was finalized and issued, correct?
Correct.
And it was issued under the auspices of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, correct?
I'm not sure if that's correct. So the legislation that was lobbied for by opioid manufacturers that created this task force, it required HHS to create the task force and to include individuals and organizations that we discussed yesterday who issued this. There were some excellent folks on that task force, including Dr. Claw, including my father-in-law was a member of that task force.
Who's that?
That's Dr. Harold too.
Was part of this task force?
Correct.
Would you agree or disagree with this simple statement, Doctor? The Pain Management Best Practices Interagency Task Force was convened by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs with the Office of National Drug Control Policy to address acute and chronic pain in light of the ongoing opioid crisis.
Yes, this was all required by Congress.
So, Your Honor, I would ask that the final report be admitted and assign exhibit number 3931.
If I missed it, I apologize. Sure. I just would like to know as Dr. Body read the final report.
And Your Honor, he's happy to review it. I understand we're going to be taking a break and then having another witness called out of order, and happy to let Mr. Beckworth and Dr. Kolodny review it and see if they have any issues with it at that point.
And I don't even know if he did that. I didn't know if he asked the question, has Dr. Body reviewed the final report? That was
I think that's a fair question to ask, given that this is not on the pretrial order.
Yeah, and I think he said he hadn't, but I'll ask it again. Have you read the final report?
No, I've read the draft report.
Yeah, I think that's what the doctor said. So, again, happy to give him an opportunity to do that, Your Honor.
All right. I will admit this exhibit into the evidence. We'll give it the number J3931.
Thanks so much, Your Honor.
At this time, I'll go ahead and take a break. As I understand it, when we come back from the break, we will move to a different witness. Is that correct, Mr. Beckworth?
That is correct, Your Honor. Christy Hoos, H-O-O-S. I think it's a relatively short witness.
Okay.
And we're fine with that, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you.
What time do we come back?
Let's take a 20-minute break. We'll begin promptly at 10:30.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hoos, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Do.
Thank you.
Get comfortable and pull that mic close enough where the judge and court reporter can hear you, okay?
Okay.
Would you tell Judge Bachman your full name, please, ma'am?
Christy Ann Hoos.
And how old of a woman are you?
I'm 41
Okay. And where do you live?
in Muskogee, Oklahoma.
How long have you lived there?
My whole life. Well, we moved a little bit, but my whole life, basically, yeah.
Okay. Are you married?
Yes.
For how long?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Your Honor. This is subject to our continuing objection in motion in limine number 8.
Okay.
Thank
we'll
you.
Note your objection and allow for Ms. Hoos to be examined. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. I can't remember if you answered that or not. How long have you been married?
21 years, June 27th.
Okay. Children?
2 boys, a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old.
Okay, so you got your hands full, huh?
Yes, 16-year-old started driving, so yes.
All right, and so tell the judge a little bit about your educational background and what you did for a living before you became a full-time stay-at-home mom.
I went to nursing school, LPN, and at Platt College in Tulsa, and I worked at St. Francis in Tulsa in the neuroscience floor for about 6 years until I had my youngest son, and then I needed to stay home. He had a lot of health problems, so.
Okay, and that time that you lived in Tulsa and worked as a nurse, is that the only time you've not lived in Muskogee?
Yes, that's the only time. We moved back there in 2010, so while my husband went to medical school, we were up there for about 10 years. So.
Okay. Where did your husband go to medical school at?
He went to OSU for his first few years, and then he went to OU for his residency.
And what kind of doctor is your husband?
He's a pediatrician.
Okay. Well, Christy, let me ask you this. For the most part in your life, did you lead a normal and happy life?
Oh, yes. I was the youngest of, I had 2 older brothers, and I was brought up in a wonderful home. My parents been married over 50 years now, and they took us to church, and I had everything I needed when I was younger. And then right after high school, I met my husband, and we got married pretty quickly, and we, started a family, and went to school. He went to medical school, and we just, everything with the kids. I PTO mom, band mom, at school all the time. In fact, this was our last year at elementary school, and I think I cried more than my son did. So we've just had a really fun time raising the kids, and being married. It's been a lot of fun. We like to go barbecue a lot, so we go and travel as a family and go barbecue and stuff like that. So.
Were you raised right?
Oh yes, yeah. I had 2 amazing parents. My dad's a deacon at the church what we were grown up in. Had great grandparents, great values.
Were you taught not to lie, or cheat, or steal?
Oh yes, yes.
Were you, up until a certain point that I'm going to ask you about in a moment, did you consider yourself a good wife to your husband?
Yes, I consider myself, yes, I did.
Did you consider yourself an excellent mother up until a point in your life?
I did. My whole life has been around my kids. In fact, I'm scared to realize what I'm going to do whenever I have my oldest one graduates in 2 years, and it's terrifying to know, like, I've been a mom this whole time. What am I supposed to do after this, So we play, we do fun things. I got a Nintendo Switch for my birthday. I guess that was for my 12-year-old, but we play games a lot, so we have fun with them. We do family trips, go to Branson every year with my family and go to the beach every summer, so yeah.
Well, Christy, again, we're gonna talk about a certain point. We'll get into that in detail in a minute. But did you ever, in your wildest dreams, think that you could become addicted to drugs?
No, never.
Never even occurred to you it was possible?
No, no, I was the doctor's wife, I was the PTO mom, I was the band mom, I was the Caden and Trey's mom. I was someone who had just a lot of pride in who I was in the church camps. I went with them, and I nursed at church camps before, and I just never would have thought that it would happen to me, no.
Well, just growing up here in Oklahoma, before you got addicted to drugs, we're going to talk about that, but before you got addicted to drugs, did you have a conception about what an addict was? Was an addict a good person or a bad person? What did you think about that?
I didn't really know a whole bunch about addicts, but, excuse me, I thought maybe it was like maybe someone homeless, I don't know, someone that wasn't like me or people that I grew up around or.
Not you.
Right.
Not a nurse, not a doctor's wife, not a great member of the community.
Right.
Right? Well, I'm going to ask you now about that in detail. And first, I want to say this. You do understand, do you not, that your medical condition is private. You don't have to disclose any of your medical information if you chose not to talk about it, right?
Right.
And just living in our state your whole life, you do understand that these are very personal issues that could involve some shame. You understand that?
I do.
And I've asked you to come here and testify to Judge Balkman. Are you willing to talk about what happened to you, even the bad stuff?
I am. It's been such a private matter, and I'm really nervous that there's a lot of people that don't know what I went through, and so this is going to be hard. But I'm ready. I'm ready to help other people. Yeah.
Well, I told Judge Balkman in opening statement we were going to call a few witnesses to talk about the power of addiction. So let me ask you about that phrase. Do you understand what I mean when I say the power of addiction now?
I do now, yes.
You didn't before, did you?
No.
So let me just ask it. The addiction that you had to opioids, was it a powerful thing?
Oh, yes. Very powerful, yes. Ruled my life for a while.
And did it surprise you, the power of the addiction to these opioids?
Yes, yeah.
Did it catch you off guard?
It did, and that's all I thought about. That's all I thought about was how I was going to get my next pill,
So let's start in the beginning. What is it that led you to the taking of prescription opioids? Would you tell Judge Balkman about that?
Excuse me. I hurt my back just throwing away trash. I just was throwing it in the big dumpster at my house, and I twisted my back, and I went to the doctor and I got some pain pills and and a muscle relaxer, and that's when it all started, was from hurting my back.
Okay. Well, were you prescribed by the doctor you went to some opioids?
Yes.
And did he tell you they were opioids? Or did you read it?
Yeah, I don't know if he told me, but I knew they were opioids, yes.
And so, were you afraid of them?
I don't think I really was, no.
Did you think, before you took them, that they would take over your life like they did?
No, not at all.
I mean, honestly, if I had been there, which I wasn't, but if I'd been there and said, Christy, do you think these will take over your life? Would you have even believed it was possible?
No.
You had to experience it first.
Oh, yeah.
And so, how long did you take these prescription opioids?
I probably was on medication for about 2 years, I bet.
Okay. And you've already told Judge Balkman they took over your life. Can you explain what happened and how they took over your life? Just tell the court about that, please.
I constantly wanted them. I constantly needed to have more. I did, once I was kind of in a really active stage of addiction, I hid pills. I wouldn't tell my husband, that I had them, and I would hide them, and I'd go to the doctor. I had such a big chart at the doctor's office because I went so often for something, that after a while, I mean, I still hurt, but after a while, I just went to see how much more, if I could get more pain medicine. Then I went to a pain specialist that put a shot in my back, and he gave me a couple of prescriptions also that I went through. I would look at my pain pills, and I would have them hidden somewhere, and I'd look at them, and I'd say in my head, I know I really probably shouldn't, but I don't really care. I'm just going to take them. I don't care. I had no willpower. I mean, I had to take them. If I didn't take them, I was laying in bed. I was sick. I don't know how many times I thought I had the flu. There were times when I woke up and my husband's staring at me, and I'm either like my hands and my feet are just kind of like almost like I'm having a seizure or something, and he puts me in the car and goes to the hospital, and blood pressure's like 60/40, and they want to put me in ICU, or they want to do something, and there's times where I had to go get IV fluids. I don't know how many times I had to do that because I was so sick. I missed so much with my boys. My biggest deal is that I never missed things with them. And I missed going to an awards ceremony one time, and that was so hard on just him. And I know it's just an award, and maybe we don't even know where the paper's at, but to him, that's a big deal. And to me, it was. I missed going on things that my son went to the Pioneer Woman one time with my family. And he had so much fun and laughter, and I'm at home withdrawing from medicine because I don't have a pill right now. I'm in bed. And it was terrible to think that I did that to my kids, or they were late to school a lot because I would be like, I just want to sleep, or I feel so bad, I don't want to get up out of bed. I mean, what parent does that? Especially whenever I'm not that person. My husband said I got so withdrawn that he was so worried that I was doing something like cheating or something on him, which I would never do. And that's hard to think that your husband would think you would do that because you're so withdrawn. My friends, I didn't talk to them. I had a nonprofit that I started called Fostering Hope with one of my good friends, and it's still going really strong, but I quit doing that because of addiction. And I hate it, and I let people down.
Christy, before you got addicted to opioids, did you love your 2 children more than anything in the world?
Oh, yes.
After you got addicted to opioids, did you still love your children just as much?
Oh, yes, yeah.
But despite the love you had for your babies, were you able to control your own brain and do the right things that you used to do?
No, I put a pill before my kids and my husband, and
Did you ever dream something in the world was powerful enough to make you do this?
no.
Do you still have trouble believing it today?
I do. The medicine made me so cloudy on stuff when I was taking it, and even now, or even when I was in rehab. But there are times where, like my son's very big in band, and we go to a band concert not too long ago, and I'm like, oh, we've not been to this place, and my husband's like, you were here last year. I don't even remember that. I don't remember it because the pills made me so cloudy and not there. Like I was there physically, but I wasn't there mentally, and they knew that. They're old enough, they saw it.
Was it hard on your husband during this period of time?
It was. I don't think he realized that I was so addicted. He didn't realize until closer to the end, really, how much medicine I had been taking.
Let's talk about that. Can you think back and name the types of opioid pills or whatever you were taking? Just name the opioids.
I had Lortab, I had Tylenol 3, Tylenol 4. I had lots of Fiorset, which is, I had lots of headaches, so I took a lot of Fiorset, and sometimes it had Codeine in it, and sometimes it didn't. And those were the main opioids, and I had a lot of Valium I took too.
You told me at one point in time that, I think you told me yesterday, you had forgotten to mention a patch that you had been prescribed. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, in 2005, I was still working at St. Francis, and I got meningitis, and I had to be in the hospital for a week. And when I got out of the hospital, I saw a pain specialist that was helping me with, because I had the headaches were terrible with meningitis, and he had given me 60, I think, like either OxyContin or 60. It's been a while ago, but and then I took all those, and I was still having pain, and so he gave me a pain patch, and I think I had 2 of those within the period of a few weeks, and then I just stopped them, and we were up. My husband and I were both up for a week, and he's so sweet to me, but we were up for a whole week withdrawing from it. It was awful, and after I came off all that, I swore I would never, ever take another pill. I mean, it was horrible. But I didn't know that was, I just, it was all because of my meningitis and my headache, so.
Christy, explain, now that you know more about addiction to opioids and how it works, can you explain to Judge Bachman if you couldn't get your hands on an opioid, would you do something else?
No, there was just probably 2 or 3 times that I would ask around and get one. I never bought any from the streets or anything like that. But if I didn't have any, I would go to bed. I would just lay in bed and be sick. And
were you exhibiting drug-seeking behavior during this period of time that you got addicted?
I think I was. I isolated a lot. I didn't I was just not who I normally was, and it was, to me, I didn't really care. I just didn't care. I just wanted medicine. I didn't care if my husband was mad or if he thought I was being, I didn't care then. I didn't care. I just wanted my pills.
The whole purpose, as I understand, of taking an opioid was because you had this pain.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And was the solution, the opioids, worse than the pain you started with? I mean, was this addiction,
Worse than,
yeah, was it worse than the problem you started with?
oh, but yeah, of course. I mean, this is something that I'm going to struggle with my whole life now. You know, the addiction is something that I work on every single day of my life. You know, of course, it's a lot worse than the addiction is. It's terrible.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the future in just a moment, but I'm going to stick with this pain. So even though you were taking the opioids and you were increasing the volume of opioids, pain, did it get worse or did it get better?
It was still there. I felt like it got worse. Like it was, I felt like it did get worse.
Okay. Well, I asked you if you ever believed that it was possible this could happen. If you could go back in a time machine and somebody showed you what you were going to do for the next couple of years while you were addicted, would you have ever taken these opioids?
No, absolutely not.
So let's talk now about your future. First, how did you stop? How did you stop taking these opioids?
Well, my husband, he figured it out, but he figured it out by looking on, I don't know if you've talked about the physician site where you can...
The prescription monitoring tool?
Yes.
Did he ask you for permission to
Yes.
look at your records?
Yes.
And what did he do?
He looked on there and saw what I was taking.
And what did he say?
We need to get you help. And I didn't want help. I didn't want it. I had friends come over and say, it's time to get help. And I'm like, no, you guys just need to leave me alone. I don't want help. I like what I'm doing. I mean, I don't like it, but this is what I'm doing, And so my husband ended up taking all my medicine, and we were going to try to wean off of it. And he took it, and during the day, my mom would come around, which, how hard is it that your mom has to monitor you, and has to watch my kids? I mean, so during the day, she would give me pills when Tracy told her to. But then I knew that eventually that he had them at his work. So I would drive up there and say hi. I just wanted to say hi, and then I'd get more. He didn't know it. I'd get it out of his drawer or wherever he had it and take a bunch back with me. And so eventually I just said, it was February 13th.
What year?
2018. And I remember where I was standing, and I fell to the floor and just said, I can't live like this anymore.
Did it feel like you were living or dying?
No, it was awful. I mean, I just couldn't imagine that I got to that point, So I told him that I was ready. I was ready to go to rehab. And we found a rehab to go to, and I left February 15th and went.
Christy, I'm going to ask you a question that I think many Oklahomans ask, and indeed I myself at one time asked this question of someone that I loved who was addicted. So here it comes. Why didn't you just use more willpower and stop on your own?
I tried. I couldn't. I'm a really person that I can do most things, and I can do it, but I couldn't. I would look at the pills and say, no, forget it, I'm just taking it. I can't. My mind was so totally different then. I didn't have any willpower.
Couldn't you just throw them down the toilet and just move on?
No.
So, where did you go to rehab?
I went to Hazelton, Betty Ford in Minnesota.
Was it easy?
Oh gosh, no.
Tell the court, just sum up, if you could, describe how the rehab went and the process.
My husband flew there that morning with me and dropped me off, and I went in and I wanted to be strong for him because he was going home to take care of life. And I didn't want anyone else to know. So it was kind of like, you go take care of life, but don't talk about it, because this is crazy, it's hard.
Let me interrupt you if you don't mind. So if you had cancer, if you had diabetes, if you had any other illness that you were going to the hospital for, would you have not wanted anybody to know? Would you have wanted to hide it?
I would have probably said, can you pick the kids up, or can you help them, or can you... And thankfully we did have friends that knew, a few friends that knew I went, and so they were very helpful and kind and prayed up with us and had dinner. And
were you ashamed?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Why were you ashamed that you were sick?
Because I didn't see it like that. I saw it as that I was weak, that I couldn't stop, and I had to go to rehab. I mean, I didn't know very many people that's been to rehab, and I don't want people to judge me. That was a big deal. I didn't want to be judged.
You're not weak today, are you? You're here telling your story, and everybody can hear it. Are you ashamed today that you got sick and had to get help?
No, I still have, I still work through a lot of stuff, but it's been hard to get to this point, but I'm here, and if I'm here to help other people.
Do you have a personal opinion about whether the stigma of shame associated with addiction needs to be eliminated somehow?
Oh, yeah.
Tell the court your opinion, please, ma'am.
When I was, I think it really hit me whenever I was in rehab, and we're sitting there, and there's a bunch of us, a bunch of women. They separate the women and the guys, so I'm in the area, and you know, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and then here's a surgeon right here to the left of me, and a nurse over here, and a hairdresser over here. I mean, there was so many different people there. That wasn't someone under the bridge. That wasn't someone that people think of as addicts. We're all there. We all had going for the same purpose, and that was to stay sober and get this stuff out, you know, work towards sobriety. And we do it every day. I mean, but it was crazy to think, wow, you're an addict too, you know, or it was just so many people that you wouldn't think that would.
I want to ask you about that. Did you think you were going to see a bunch of bums when you got to rehab? Like people that live under, you mentioned people that live under a bridge. Is that what you thought you were going to see?
I really had no clue. The one thing that we really wanted in a rehab was people that wanted to be there, and not like court-appointed people. We wanted, when we talked about it, we wanted to go to a rehab that was, the people are there to get better, not just there because they had to be.
Well, what kind of people did you see there?
Oh gosh. let's see, there's two different areas. Like there's a professional area, so there's like doctors, lawyers, anything that is professional, accountants and stuff. And then there's another area of non-professional people, or I was not in the professional area, I was in the other one. But we all came together when we did group, and so there was every walk of life was in there, every walk of life.
Do you think that our society has a opinion that addicts are just bad people doing bad things? Is that what you
I think so. Yeah.
But now that you've been addicted yourself and been to rehab, what do addicts really look like? Are they just bad people doing bad things?
No, addicts look like me. They look like you. They look like our neighbor. They look like our doctor that we go to. They look like anybody, our hairdresser. Who knows? They're everywhere, and I think they're scared, just like I was, to let people know they struggle. They struggle too.
What was the hardest thing being in that rehab for you, Christy?
One was when you get there, they take away your phone, any access to anything, and so the first 4 days I detoxed.
Describe that detox.
Basically, I was sick. Oh, I was sicker than I ever been before. I threw up, headache, shaked. I did everything. They gave me some sort of medicine to kind of help me out on that. So I was in there for 4 days in the medical part. And then you go to your inpatient area. And I had like 2 other roommates in there. And then the whole rehab is very strict, from like 6 in the morning until like 10 at night. You have something to do the whole time. And so, and then there's all kinds of alcoholics and addicts there. And so like I would go to a class for narcotics is what I would go to a class for during the day, with somebody else would go to a different class. And then eventually my insurance quit paying for my inpatient, so I stayed there, but we paid for an outpatient bed, but I still stayed there. But I had to leave and go to meetings, and we still had group, and I had more free time. You can only have visitors twice a week, but I was in Minnesota, so my mom came up there and stayed for a week with a cousin, and so I saw her once or twice. And then March 5th was my son's birthday. And my son had to come get me at rehab to go celebrate his birthday with him. We went to Mall of America, but the worst part is they had to drop me back off, and I was at rehab during my kid's birthday. And I know now that my boys see that I'm strong and I did it, but it was so hard. It was so hard for them to come in and see where I lived for a month and show them around. And I had to show them how this is exciting. I didn't want them to feel sorry for me, but it was just so hard. But I'm so thankful that I had a husband that brought him up there to me. He didn't have to do that, but he brought him. And he made it a wonderful day and a wonderful outing that day. And it was hard. It was probably one of my hardest days, is to know that my kid on his birthday had to go see his mom at rehab.
Christy, you made it through, didn't you?
I did.
And what day did you get out of rehab?
They have a family program, and so my mom and my husband came up and did it on a weekend, and I went home with them about 28 days after I was in there.
And you're back home?
Yes.
You're living again?
Yes, thank goodness.
Not taking opioids?
No.
Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about your future. Did you learn from the people that treated you that this was a lifetime problem for you, this
Yes.
disease of addiction?
It's a every day. You wake up every day and you have to decide and have to tell yourself that you're an addict. I remember the first time I had to say I was an addict in front of the group of people. We were in a round and they were like, I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic. And I'm like, what am I supposed to say? And they're like, well, what'd you take? And, so I said, one of the hardest parts was, I'm Christy, I'm an addict. But I can say that, and I can say that now.
Can you say it now without shame?
All right.
Nobody has shame when they say, I have cancer, do they?
No,
Nobody has shame when they say, I have diabetes, do they?
no,
And nobody should have shame when they have an addiction problem, should they?
no.
They're entitled to get treatment for this, aren't they?
They are. I'm a lucky one. I don't know how. How am I the lucky one that didn't die during this? Because there were several nights that my husband would pick candy from my mouth because I'm about to choke in the middle of the night because I took too much medicine. How am I the lucky one that got to go to Minnesota and get rehab whenever there's other people out there that need it? It's not right. It's I had lots of issues with shame, lots. But yes, I'm here and I'm grateful, and there's people that say I'm a grateful recovering, and I thought they're full of it. There's no way you could be grateful recovering addict. But I am. I'm grateful and I'm a recovering addict. I am.
Well, you had a lot of help from your husband and your family, right?
Yes.
Not everybody has that.
Right.
Not everybody can go to Minnesota to rehab, can they?
No.
How important do you think it is that we have a world-class treatment facility for everybody who's got addicted to opioids right here in Oklahoma?
My wish is that this outcome of this would help so many people to be able to go to do what I got to do. I got to learn so much about the disease. I got to learn that it is a disease, that it is, I learned so much from people that came in that lectured. They lectured all day about things, and it was amazing to learn about. I mean, if you do have heart problems or a stroke, you learn about that disease. And that's what I did. I got to learn about it, and that's how I can kind of overcome a lot of it. It's from knowledge and know that when I'm asleep, my addiction is pumping up trying to get me. I wake up, if I'm not saying that, I'm a wake up and say, you know what, I don't forget it, I'll just give into it. My addiction's ready to jump back on and for me to go out there and do something stupid again. But every day I make a choice. And my choice is I'm not living like that anymore because I love my kids, I love myself, and I love my husband much more than a pill.
So you believe and you were taught that you've got a lifelong condition.
Oh, yes.
You're going to fight it every day of your life.
Yes.
Christy, if you had not gotten appropriate and timely addiction treatment, would you be alive today?
I don't know. What I hear and what I've learned, I could have went down a very, very bad road. I mean, worse than that, worse than I already was. So I could very well be gone.
Christy, you loaned me something for a very short period of time. I'm going to give it back to you. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I want you to tell Judge Bachman what that is, and I'm going to give it back to you.
Okay. So I go to meetings twice a week, and every month you get a chip. And so I have 11 chips at home, but this is my 1-year chip that I got February 15th, or 16th, February 16th of this year. And next year I'll get a 2-year chip, and so on. And so I keep this with me as a reminder of how much work that I put in every day to it, and it's pretty special because I keep it with me at all times. So when I got my 1-year chip, my closest friends and my husband, they all came. They give you a birthday cake when you go to your meetings for this. You get a birthday cake, and everybody takes this and they pray over it in the meetings every month, and this one, and so it's really special. I have a lot that I did for it, so I keep it with me.
Well, thank you for loaning it to me for about a half an hour. Your Honor, I'll pass the witness.
Hello, Ms. Hughes. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I have a few questions for you here today.
Okay.
So I want to go back a little bit to your nursing degree.
Mhm.
I understand you graduated from Platt in about 2001, is that correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And while you were there, you did take a class in pharmacology, is that correct? I know I'm going way back. Do you remember taking the class in pharmacology?
Yeah, I mean, on side, we learned like side effects of different medicines, a few side effects, yeah.
And do you remember that covering Schedule II drugs?
No, I remember it covering like, the docs, I can't even say it, different like heart medicines, or, if we did, it was like constipation, something like that. It
Do you remember,
wasn't.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Do you remember it covering different classes of drugs?
No.
Okay. Do you remember you had to take a test when you got your license, your LPN license?
Yes.
Do you remember that also containing a section on pharmacology, your licensure test?
Yes, I remember one, the same medicine I was trying to say, digitoxin. I remember that was a huge deal in nursing school. We had to know that. That was on the test. I know that.
Do you remember that, when you were an LPN, did you essentially do all the things that an RN did?
I did, yes.
And that included administering medication?
Mm-hmm, yes.
And you did that your entire career was at St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa?
Yes.
And you would administer medications to patients at St. Francis?
Yes.
And did you learn about opioid medications as part of your job?
I did. I give medications, yes.
And while you were at St. Francis, were opioid medications actually locked up?
Yes.
And you learned to look for side effects of opioid medications at St. Francis?
We did, yes.
Now, you said you had meningitis in 2005?
Yes.
And I actually have some experience with meningitis as well. That was pretty painful for you,
Oh,
wasn't it?
yes, very painful.
You were hospitalized for it?
Yes, for a week, yes.
And then you said after you left the hospital, you were prescribed opioids
Mm-hmm, yes.
from your doctor?
Yes.
And who was your doctor then?
It's been a long time ago. I can't remember.
After you left the hospital, your doctor prescribed you 60 OxyContin pills?
Mm-hmm, yes.
Okay. And you took all of those pills?
I did.
Okay. And you said he also prescribed for you a pain patch?
Yes.
And it was out of the hospital?
Yes, out of hospital.
Were you also on pain medication in the hospital?
Yes.
And you used all of that pain medication?
I did, yes.
And you didn't become addicted in 2005?
After that, I went through some withdrawal feelings, like I stayed up at night, and but it was so bad when I got off of it that I didn't get addicted then, no.
And your husband was with you during that time?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So you told Mr. Whitten about a back injury you had in 2016?
Yes.
You did something around the house, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you hurt your back, it was a significant enough injury that you sought medical attention?
Yes.
And before you went on prescription medication, you had tried what doctors call conservative treatment?
Like ibuprofen or something like
Right,
that?
you tried a couple of things, right?
Right.
You tried ibuprofen,
I probably did take ibuprofen.
and you had tried some hot and cold packs, heating pads, ice packs, things like that?
I'm not good about putting those on there because I don't stay still long enough, but
Do you remember trying that?
More ibuprofen than anything.
Okay. Do you remember going to physical therapy?
I did.
Okay. And then at the same time, you also have had some problems with migraines throughout your life, right?
Oh, yes.
And those go back to your teenage years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the back pain you have, it was severe enough that you sought treatment both conservatively and with your doctor, correct?
Yes.
And which doctor did you go to for that?
I'd rather not talk about say the doctor's name.
Is it Dr. Dansby in Muskogee?
No. Yes.
Okay. And did you go to him for the conservative treatment, the physical therapy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
The conservative treatment failed, correct?
Yes.
And you were in severe enough pain that you needed to get on medication, correct?
Right.
Okay. And so you continue to seek treatment with your doctor and go on medication, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's when he prescribed Lortab for you?
Yes.
And was the pain severe enough that you felt you needed to get on medication?
Yes.
Was the pain severe enough that you were not able to do your daily functions, help your family, do that sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay. And would the Lortab help you?
It did for a period of time, yes.
And then you also said you were taking some acetaminophen with codeine, is that correct?
Yes.
And then I think you also mentioned, I'm bad with this one, Floracet?
Oh, Fioricet.
Fioricet, thank you. And I think the generic name of that, and I struggle with this one, so you might have to help me if you know it. Acetaminophen with butalbital?
I think that, I don't know how to say it either.
Okay, that's the generic name?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Were you taking the acetaminophen with codeine and the acetaminophen with butalbital at the same time?
I'm sure I was. Yeah.
And did your husband know you were taking all these medications?
No, not until the end.
Your husband knew you had the back pain?
Yes.
And he knew you were taking medications?
He knew, yeah, but I didn't tell him every medicine that I got, no.
Well, I mean, when you originally went to the doctor, you weren't hiding the back pain or hiding the fact that you got medications,
Right.
correct?
No.
In addition to those medications, you also started taking Valium, correct?
Yes. For the muscle spasms in the back.
Is that what they were for?
Mhm.
Okay. And the butalbital is a barbiturate, correct?
I think so.
Okay. And during this time, you weren't using a pain patch, correct?
No.
And you weren't taking a drug called Nucynta or Nucynta ER, correct? Is that correct? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, no.
Do you remember your doctor talking about the risk of your medications?
I don't.
Do you fill all these prescriptions at a pharmacy in Muskogee?
Yes.
And did the pharmacist ever talk to you about the medications when you were filling them?
I fill them at several different pharmacies in Muskogee.
Did any of those pharmacists discuss the medications with you?
Not that I know of.
Did you get handouts from the pharmacist with the information?
Yeah, they would have been in the bag, yeah.
Did you read any of that information?
No.
Isn't it correct that it's never been determined which of the medications you were addicted to?
No, I was addicted to opioids. When I was in rehab, I left there with naltrexone, and I stayed on that for a while.
Do you remember telling us at your deposition, the question was asked, was it ever determined which of the medications you were addicted to, and you answering no?
I could have answered no, yes, but it was opioids is what I was addicted to.
It wasn't the Valium or the barbiturates?
No.
Were you taking your medication as prescribed by Dr. Dansby?
At first, and then after that I increased it.
Did you run out of the medication before?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And did you go get more?
I would, if it wasn't time to get more, then I would be be in bed and wait until I could get more.
Did you, you said you had some symptoms, were it flu-like symptoms?
Yes.
Did you report those to Dr. Dansby?
No.
Did you ever go back to Dr. Dansby when you thought you were having a problem with the medications?
No, he probably knows now since we mentioned his name in court, but I've never went and talked to him about it.
He didn't know you went to rehab, is that correct? And he's no longer your doctor?
No.
That's all I have, thank you.
Thanks.
May I, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Christie, I'm trying to figure out why some of these questions were asked of you, so let me see if I can start here. Have you ever heard the expression blaming the victim?
I think so.
So let's do this. You were in the rehab for
Yeah.
what, about a month?
Yes.
Do you think you would know what you were treated for? I mean, you were the one there.
Right.
Did the doctors tell you what they treated you for?
Well, I mean, the medicine that I was given for withdrawals were for,
Opioids.
right.
Did they tell you specifically that you were addicted to opioids?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and I was sent to the separate classes were opioid
Or opioid
groups,
addiction?
yes. Mhm.
So let me ask you about this. Back to blaming the victim. You were a nurse,
Right.
right? Your husband's a doctor, right?
Right,
I forgot to ask you, what kind of doctor is your husband?
pediatrician.
Okay. So this class in pharmacology, I'm sure you studied a lot about drugs. But here's my question. If they had taught you a course that opioids are addictive, would that have stopped you from going to the doctor and getting opioids for your back injury?
Probably not, because I hurt. So.
Well, even though you were a nurse and you had been taught various things, did you ever think that this could happen to you? You could
No.
become an opioid addict.
No.
That's the point. Did the surgeon who was in there with you for rehab, he was a surgeon, did he think he was going to get addicted to opioids?
No, no.
So, Ms. Fisher asked you if you got addicted the first time you took an opioid, and I think you said you did it, right?
That I didn't, what?
You had some withdrawals.
Oh, yeah, withdrawals.
But you didn't spin off into addiction.
No,
Good. But you did the second time,
yeah,
right?
right.
Is there any doubt about that? That you got addicted the second time and your whole life turned upside down?
The first time I had that, the pills I had was for 1 week, and the patches for, I think you trade them out like every 3 days or something like that.
So they
And
were short term,
yeah, it was a short term.
but you still had some withdrawal symptoms.
Oh my gosh, it
Struggled with
was horrible. Yeah, not as horrible as the withdrawals in rehab, but
But the second time you took opioids for a longer period of time.
right. Mm-hmm.
You got addicted.
Yes, yeah. And as for my physician, he's a good man. He would never do anything that if he knew I was going to get addicted to a pain pill, this isn't his fault.
Well, you don't know what this particular doctor had been told by the drug manufacturers, do you, about the
I
risk of
don't.
addiction?
And I never want to blame him for anything. And so it's really hard. I feel terrible. He's a Muskogee, small town.
Yeah.
And I never want to blame him for anything. This happened.
Well, you're not. You're
Yeah,
not. You
I
made that
just-
very clear.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Wooden.
I have nothing further, thank you.
Thank you.
May she be excused, Your
Yes,
Honor.
thank you, Ms. Hughes.
Thank you.
may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. So Dr. Kolodny, take a look at Exhibit 3931. That's the final report of the Interagency Task Force. You have that in front of you?
It doesn't have the code on it that you just read, but it does say final report on it.
Okay. We probably haven't put a sticky on it right now, but it's the one that says final report?
Yes, I think I have the right draft.
Okay, that should be Exhibit 3931. And if you take a look at page 71,
Okay.
and there they have a listing of items under the heading emphasize or expand. And may we publish this, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
There we go. So emphasize or expand, and point number 3 starts out, there is wide variation in patient and disease factors that determine the dose of opioids that is optimal for pain relief and minimizes risk. Would you agree with that statement or not?
Yeah, I think in general, I would agree with that.
Okay, and then if you look at the last recommendation under item 3, recommendation 3D, the CDC guideline meant for primary care clinicians should explicitly emphasize that the 90 MME day maximum dose recommendation is not mandatory, but is a target that may be exceeded if clinically appropriate when benefits outweigh risks. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I think as written, literally, it's probably okay, except the issue here is that when you go above 90 MME per day, or you're going to take a patient above that threshold, I really can't think of instances outside of palliative care where the benefits would outweigh the risks. I think that particular recommendation that you've highlighted is the very reason that the Pain Care Forum lobbied for the creation of this report. Purdue Pharma actually calculated exactly what that 90 MME per day recommendation was going to cost them and determined that in the state of Oklahoma, that specific recommendation would cost them $16 million a year, and nationally about $900 million a year, which is why they lobbied hard to create for the creation of this task force, and were able to get members of the Pain Care Forum on this task force.
Doctor, I just asked you whether you agreed or disagreed. I didn't ask you to go into Purdue Pharma and Pain Care Forum. Do you agree or disagree with the statement?
I think literally the statement is probably okay. It's just that when you go above 90 MME per day outside of palliative care, I really can't think of a situation where the benefits would outweigh the risks.
But what the task force is saying is that it should be the individual treating physician that makes that determination, right?
Yes, and that's right, and I pretty much agree with it. The difference here is that we're now the United States has experienced a very long period in which your client misinformed the medical community. This language would have been fine 20 years ago. The reason that the CDC guideline recommendation was important is because for many years, doctors were being taught that there should be no upper dose limit, which is why I think there should be, why guidance on upper dose is important.
I'm having a deja vu from Dr. Maslinduce. I'm just asking you
Objection.
about whether,
To strike, also on the basis of rudeness.
well,
Deja vu about Dr., and I'm glad you got the name right this time. Remember, that is absolutely improper. I moved to strike it. It's not what cross-examination is meant to do.
I'll grant the objection, but I'll permit Mr. Yoder to rephrase this question.
thank you. I'm not asking you to tell me about Purdue Pharma when I ask you whether you agree that the decision of dosage is best made by the individual treating physician.
Yes, I believe that a physician treating a patient who's well informed about the risks and benefits of the medication they're prescribing and understands that patient's medical problems, that clinician should be making decisions about what's best for the patient.
And PROP asked the FDA to impose a maximum dosage requirement for opioids, right?
No, we didn't. That's a misunderstanding. PROP did not ask FDA to impose a limit. FDA doesn't regulate what doctors can do. Doctors can prescribe off of a label. Sometimes it's appropriate to prescribe off of a label. We never would have submitted that petition if it would have resulted in physicians or clinicians having their clinical decision-making constrained. This was about constraining Johnson & Johnson and other opioid manufacturers from promoting aggressive and improper use. We didn't file a petition to constrain clinical decision-making. PROP has always believed that, exactly what you had asked me about, that a clinician who's well informed about the risks and benefits of a medication and knows their patient, that clinician should be making the decisions.
Let's take a look at the petition and see what the words say, because words matter. It's Exhibit 14J 1460. It's on page 2. We've looked at this before. Item 2 of the specific actions requested by PROP to changes in the opioid analgesic labels. And can you just read for me, without giving the commentary, if you could, item 2.
At a maximum daily dose equivalent to 100 milligrams of morphine for non-cancer pain.
Is it your view, Dr. Kolodny, that certain people shouldn't be allowed to petition Congress for legislation?
I believe that we should be allowed to lobby Congress, if that's what you're asking.
Do you believe that certain people or entities should be prevented from lobbying Congress for creation of task force, like the interagency task force that we've been looking at?
No, I believe that corporations should be allowed to lobby Congress.
In our country, that's an important right, isn't it?
Yes.
And we don't tell people that you can't petition Congress if you might have a financial interest in something, right?
No, I think much of congressional lobbying is related to financial interests.
If you look back at your PROP petition, you were looking at item 2, and would you agree or disagree that what PROP was trying to accomplish was to have the FDA restrict what a drug manufacturer could say about its own medications?
Yes, not constrain what a doctor could do, because that would not have limited a doctor from going above 100 milligrams of morphine. That would still be allowable, but we wanted the FDA to limit Johnson & Johnson, other opioid manufacturers, from claiming that above 100 milligram morphine equivalence was safe and effective. This was about limiting your client's ability to claim that that's appropriate.
And the FDA declined to do what Prop wanted it to do, correct?
At that particular time, they've just reviewed this again this week, and I believe they are going to move in this direction.
Your Honor, I move the last comment as non-responsive and speculative.
I'll sustain the objection.
And move to strike?
Move to strike.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Kolodny, isn't it true that in addition to the federal level, the state of Oklahoma has published guidelines acknowledging that the use of prescription opioids for the treatment of chronic pain is appropriate?
The most recent education issued by the state of Oklahoma on opioid prescribing emphasizes the lack of evidence supporting long-term use of opioids for chronic non-cancer pain.
Wasn't my question. Isn't it true that the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority has issued guidelines for physicians to consult with in determining the use of prescription opioids for the treatment of chronic pain?
I would need to see the specific guideline you're referring to.
Okay, I will show that to you. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit J117, 117. So, Dr. Kolodny, in the course of all the work you did in this case, did you make any effort to determine whether the state of Oklahoma has issued guidelines for physicians to consider in evaluating the use of prescription opioids for the treatment of chronic pain?
Before working on litigation for the state of Oklahoma, I was working with the state of Oklahoma on opioid prescribing guidance and educational program for Oklahoma clinicians.
So if we could take it in stages. My question was about the work you did in this litigation. And if you want to say yes or no, you can do that, and then I can ask you if you were otherwise familiar with it. So,
Your Honor, I object again. He asked him if he had known about the prescribing guidelines, and Dr. Kolodny actually testified that he has worked with the state on that. Another example of this attorney trying to cut a witness off and not letting him answer the questions that are asked. It's completely improper. I just got, and I also object, they're trying to hide the truth. I've never seen a situation where a witness testifying under oath is not allowed to answer the questions.
if you'd answer my question, Your Honor, wouldn't have a problem. My question was simply in the course of the work he did in this case, I was very specific, did he make any effort to become familiar with these guidelines? That was my question.
And his
He didn't
answer,
answer the question.
excuse me, his answer was, I believe what he was saying was that he actually worked with the state on the prescribing guidelines.
We'll overrule the objection. Go ahead and restate the question, please.
Thank you. My question is, in the course of the work that you did as an expert, as a paid expert in this litigation, did you make any effort to determine what guidelines, if any, the state of Oklahoma had issued to physicians in the state to consider in determining whether to prescribe opioids for the treatment of chronic pain?
Not in the course of the litigation, but prior to the litigation, I became familiar with Oklahoma's efforts with regard to opioid prescribing guidelines.
Thank you. So, are you familiar with these guidelines, Exhibit J117?
Yes, I believe I've seen this document before.
Okay, Your Honor, I would move Exhibit J117 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
J117 will be admitted into the evidence.
And similar to what the CDC did in its guidelines, would you agree that the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority has issued guidelines for physicians to consider before they prescribe opioid to treat chronic pain?
I'm sorry,
Sure.
could you ask that again?
Would you agree that what these guidelines do is they set forth factors that the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority is suggesting that physicians consider in prescribing an opioid for the treatment of chronic pain?
Yes, guidance.
That's good. We're there. So let's take a look at it. Item 3 is that they're recommending that there be, and this is the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority.
Mr. Yoder, are you sure this is the Healthcare Authority? This looks to me like it's the Department of Health. That little H with the apple, I think that's the Oklahoma State Department of Health's logo.
You undoubtedly would recognize the, whatever it is with the apple more than I do, Your Honor. Why don't we just, do you know, can you tell us, Dr. Plodny, which state agency is the one that issued these guidelines?
I believe this is the Department of Health.
Okay, thank you. So, the Department of Health, then, for the state, if we look at item 3, one of the recommendations for factors to be considered by a physician in making this individualized determination is that a comprehensive evaluation should be performed before initiating opioid treatment for chronic pain. You agree with that, right?
I would agree with that.
And then number 4, healthcare providers should screen for risk of abuse or addiction before initiating opioid treatment. Do you agree with that?
Can't hurt, but there really isn't an adequate way of predicting who will get addicted. I kind of like the screening because it gets doctors to ask questions that they might not normally ask. For example, some screens include asking patients whether or not they have a history of smoking or personal or family history of drug or alcohol problems. I like the questions on the screen, and it certainly doesn't hurt, but they can't allow you to predict who will or will not become addicted.
The individual, correct?
Right, there's no way to predict in advance who gets addicted.
So, well, we'll get to that. Are you aware that the state has issued a toolkit to practitioners in Oklahoma to use in evaluating the prescribing of opioids for the treatment of chronic pain?
I think I recall, I believe I recall that.
If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as J2719.
Thank you.
And this is from the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority. And what is the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority?
I believe it's the Medicaid authority for the state of Oklahoma.
Sooner Care?
I believe so.
And you talked about that a little bit, right?
Yes.
So take a look. So, Your Honor, I move Exhibit J2719 into evidence.
No objection.
J2719 will be admitted into the evidence.
So this is material from the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority. It's setting forth a pain management program. If you take a look at page 81, it lists a number of practice tools, correct?
Yes.
And one of those practice tools, if you look at page 89, is something called an opioid risk tool. You see that?
I do.
As you understand it, is an opioid risk tool a tool that would allow a physician to help assess the risks to an individual patient who's being considered for opioid therapy for chronic pain?
No, I think that what I like about the tool is that it includes questions that a doctor might not ask without the tool. And so I like the fact that you've got a prompt to ask a patient about whether or not there are drug or alcohol problems in their family or that they've experienced. It includes asking patients about trauma, mental health history. I like the questions on this. I wouldn't object to doctors using it at all, but the idea that it can generate a score, low risk, moderate risk, or high risk, that would allow you to determine, the chance that a patient might get addicted, that I don't believe works.
I may have misunderstood then, because yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, you testified that in your view, so-called risk assessment tools were basically a hoax.
Yes, the idea that you could give this to a patient and determine their risk of becoming addicted, I believe that's a hoax. And in fact, this tool was invented by Dr. Lynn Webster, former president of the American Academy of Pain Medicine, one of the individuals we discussed yesterday.
And if you take a look, the title of this is Opioid Risk Tool, correct?
Yes.
And this is a practice tool that the state, Sooner Care, is providing to physicians to use in order to assess risk, right?
Yes, I believe that's why they're using it. I mean, I think they probably included this because they believed what many people believe, which is that this actually can predict who gets addicted. This, I think, shows the influence that your client had on the state of Oklahoma.
Here we go again. I'm not asking you about your theories of things. I'm asking you about facts. And don't you agree that this is an opioid risk tool that the state of Oklahoma is providing to physicians in order to evaluate the prescribing of an opioid for treatment of chronic pain?
Your Honor, I object to that preamble for the question. What the attorney said was, I'm not asking you about your opinions, I'm asking about facts. And the question was, don't you agree? Which is an opinion. So I think if he's going to ask it that way, Dr. Claudia should be allowed to state his opinion. You didn't ask him a fact question.
Sustained.
Take a look at...
May he answer the question, Your Honor? The previous question that we cut him off of was just that.
I sustained your object to the question.
I was just not the answer. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So take a look at page 83, if you would. You see this? This is a progress note, pain assessment, and documentation tool.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And again, this is one of these practice tools that the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority is providing to physicians to assist them in making individual determinations regarding the prescribing of opioids for the treatment of chronic pain, correct?
Just give me, I'm somewhat familiar with this tool. I just need to review it and refresh my memory.
Yeah, and just to put it in context, if we look at page 81, it's the list of practice tools, and then page 83, that's just 2 pages after that, right?
One point of clarification. The page you were just reading, was that in the document that says contract switched? Is it possible?
I gave you the document, counsel, you can look at it.
Let's ask for his.
No, I just make a request that I be allowed to conduct my
83.
examination.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was just trying to understand. I didn't know if we switched up. Thank you.
Keep going.
Doctor,
Yes?
this page is 2 pages after the listing on page 81, practice tools, correct?
Correct.
And it's a form that the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority is providing in this package of practice tools that it is giving to physicians in the state of Oklahoma to make a determination regarding prescribing opioids for the treatment of chronic pain, correct?
Correct.
And if you look at page 83, this is actually a form of Janssen Pharmaceutical, correct?
Oh, that's right. It does say Janssen at the bottom.
And they're including it in this packet, right?
They are.
So take a look, if you would, at page 44. Page 44 lists the working group members who were involved in issuing these prescribing guidelines. Do you see that? You on page 44?
I do.
And you see that one of the work group members is Jessica Hawkins from the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services.
I do.
And you know Ms. Hawkins, right?
I do.
You know she's also testifying as an expert in this case, correct?
Yes.
And then under that is a Mike Herndon from the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority. You know Mr. Herndon as well, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And then Claire Nguyen,
Yes.
who testified as an expert in this case, right?
Yes.
And she's with the Oklahoma State Department of Health.
Yes.
Okay. So look at, you familiar with the National Institute on Drug Abuse?
Yes.
Let me hand you another document. May I approach you?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Are you familiar with the opioid risk tool that has been published by the National Institute on Drug Abuse?
I don't think we would, so the opioid risk tool I am familiar with because we just had it on the screen. I've been familiar with it for a while. It was mentioned in an NIH publication, but I wouldn't say that NIH published it. Dr. Lynn Webster published it, copyrighted it.
Well, this is a page from a website, drugabuse.gov, correct?
Yes, the opioid risk tool appeared on the NIH website and is widely disseminated and taught across, has been taught across the country. I think that because the CDC guideline rejected it, that's happening less. But I am aware that NIH and maybe even still has the opioid risk tool on their website.
So your testimony is that you think these opioid risk tools can predict the likelihood of a particular patient developing addiction from the use of a prescription opioid. Is that a fair characterization of your testimony?
This has been studied, and the study demonstrated that the opioid risk tool doesn't work.
And that's your view of it?
It's a fact that there is a publication that demonstrated that the opioid risk tool doesn't do what we all wish it could do.
So you disagree with NIH?
If NIH had asked me whether or not I thought they should put this on their website, I would have suggested that they not put it on their website. Certainly now that it's been shown not to work, I would hope that they would take it off of their website.
And you disagree with the state of Oklahoma the healthcare authority for including it as a practice tool that they're providing to physicians in evaluating the prescribing of an opioid for treatment of chronic pain?
If the Department of Health had asked me before they put this together, I probably would have advised them not to use the opioid risk tool. I certainly can't fault them or NIDA or anyone for using the opioid risk tool, because your client and other opioid manufacturers, their key opinion leaders, the front groups, widely disseminated this misinformation.
Okay, we'll get to that, Dr. Kolodny. We'll get to that. So your view is everybody's influenced. Even today, with all of this knowledge out in the public domain about opioids and the opioid crisis, everyone's still influenced. How are you saying?
My view is that opioid manufacturers had a pervasive influence on the way the medical and scientific community understood opioids for many years, and fortunately that has begun to change. In fact, your own expert, we heard on a video,
Your Honor, I'm
would
going
agree
to
with
object
me.
to this.
Your Honor, he asked him his opinion, and when you ask this man his opinions, you may not like it, but he's offered to testify about it.
Did not ask him his opinion, Your Honor.
Overrule the objection.
So can,
May I say something? The proper procedure I would submit, and I've never seen it done differently, is to let the witness finish his answer. If any objects for responsiveness, the court can sustain it. But at least we know what he said. The way he's been doing it, he's not finishing, and it's difficult to tell if it's responsive or not. So I would ask that it be allowed to finish, and then the court would.
Proper procedure is to allow one lawyer to handle the witness questioning and objecting, not two.
Thank you, Mr. Ottaway. Back to Mr. Yoder.
thank you. Have to see.
He didn't ask me either.
Mr. Yoder, we were going to break at noon. Should we just
That's
stop
fine.
right now?
We can break now.
All
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, counsel. Let's go ahead and break for lunch. We'll resume at 1:30. All right?
Your Honor, do you want to
Yeah, let's go over exhibits. Yeah.